Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
So thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of Inflection Point Podcast, where we are dedicated to anti-racism activation and the art of listening and authentic conversation, engagement, and action. So I'm your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis Bauman and Gail Hunter.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome.
Thank you. So I'm really excited about this particular episode, but if you listen to us on a regular basis, I'm usually excited about every episode that we have. So, but in 2025, we turned our attention towards community engagement and the grassroots of change. So that, in effect, is our theme for the entire year of 2025. So we'll be exploring stories and strategies and successes of community-driven movements that are making a difference. And we've already had a couple of them, and we're getting ready to introduce another one tonight. So the point is that each episode will focus on both theory and practical examples. The point is to allow our audience to gain insights that they can apply in real world community engagement efforts. So we'll be introducing case studies as well as guests who reflect community engagement in action. So what do you say about that, Mavis and Gail?
Sounds great.
I'm on it. Yes, sounds so good.
Excellent. So in this particular episode, our case study is focused on an organization called Until We Are Free. Now, this is a human rights organization, a movement that is led by formerly incarcerated criminal justice experts. So these are individuals, there are two particular individuals that we're going to mention specifically who started this organization as part of their own journey in dealing with incarceration. And so we'll tell you a little bit about their story and how they came to be. But the organization itself focuses on building capital, resources, and support to provide pathways to civic and economic liberation for individuals who have been disenfranchised by mass incarceration. So the core question for this episode is, what can happen when active engagement is present in prison reform conversations? So when you think about the idea of active engagement in prison reform conversations, what does that look like? So these individuals that we're going to be talking about and this particular organization, that's exactly what they do. They bring active engagement into reform conversation, prison reform conversation. So here's an even deeper question. Is it possible to build trust into prison reform efforts? So if you've been listening to us, we talk a lot about authentic conversations. And one of the things that is necessary in authentic conversation, well, there's a couple of things. One is this idea of being an active listener, but also there's an element of trust that has to be embedded in whatever that conversation is, whether you're in the role of speaking or you're in the role of actively listening. That process, if you will, has to be focused on trust, right? So maybe, Gail, would you agree with that?
That seems to be very basic requirements for developing reforms. Yeah, go ahead, Gail.
What I was going to say, 100% it has to be based on trust. And so it has to be created based in that belief and that value and honesty. Yeah.
And another thing, I guess you're probably going to get to this, Anita, but the fact that the individuals we're going to be talking about were previously incarcerated. So people who have the lived experience are best in the position to develop that trust, I think.
Yes, you are hitting the nail right on the head, because the two individuals that we will talk about are exactly that. And I look at it through that lens of common experiences. So if I'm going to try to school you, educate you, reform you on a particular topic, and I have not had any of those types of experiences, then I feel like I would be doing you a grave disservice. So if I'm able, like as a life coach, there are a lot of things that I bring from my personal experiences that I bring into that life coaching arena, so I could speak to people from those commonalities. And I think that's the one thing that I really like about this particular organization, is that they have those individuals, as Mavis said, who have that lived experience, right?
Right.
So we're gonna I'm gonna move the conversation along just to give a little bit more background into the organization itself. It was founded with the goal of supporting, empowering, creating alternative pathways to success. I love the way that sounds, creating alternative pathways to success, and in particular, advocating for systemic change in the criminal justice system. So it was built on this strong base of formerly incarcerated individuals who actively engaged in the organization's work. So they created this organization based on their own experiences, and they're actively engaged in the organization, the work of the organization, the success of the organization. So one of the people that we're going to mention is a gentleman by the name of Kevin Reese. And I have this really cool quote from him, right? It says, "We honor and value our comrades and provide a safe space to work with our collective community through our shared experiences. This is the pathway to collective liberation and true public safety." So I love the fact that that quote talks about this idea of the liberation of and former prison reform and all of that, but it also connects it directly to true public safety. So I see you guys shaking your head. What does that say to you, this idea of public safety being a part of prison reform efforts?
Well, I think we're talking about both the former prisoners and the rest of society.
That's right.
So even though, most of what we're going to be talking about today is coming from the perspective of those incarcerated, any prison sentence affects a whole society. So public safety would be on the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, Gail, and specifically, if you think about it within the context of what we've talked about so many times in the past, this idea of social determinants of health.
Right. That's right.
Right? And if you recall, one of those social determinants of health is public safety.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're wired to find the ability to be safe and feel safe with self and others. And so, of course, in a community, the community wants to feel safe. The individuals want to feel safe, and as the collective does. And so it's crucial. And somebody coming out of prison also wants to come back into that public community and feel safe and know that they can contribute and they can participate in the way that they really, truly desire to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to jump right into sharing a little bit of information about the two founders. So one of them is a gentleman, which I just read a quote from his name. His name is Kevin Reese. And the other one, I believe, but I'm not 100% certain that I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Kaylee Griffey. Mm-hmm. I believe that. So Kaylee, if you're listening, I apologize that I mispronounced your name, and perhaps when I meet you, I can get the correct pronunciation. But so I'm going to start off with Kevin. So the two of them from what I gather, the two of them had two completely separate incarceration experiences, if you will. But they both ended up in the same place because the two of them together are the co-founders and the co-directors of Until We Are All Free, the movement, right? So there's the movement but then there's also a consulting and training group that they do. So I'm excited that we'll be able to have, I believe Kevin might be the one that's on the show with us, so we can get a little bit more information, a little bit more deep into the story of how the two of them actually came together to be able to create this. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on Kevin. It says here that he spent 14 years incarcerated inside of the criminal justice system. Now, both of these individuals are from the Minnesota. They're in the Minnesota area, specifically Minneapolis, I believe. So he spent 14 years inside the criminal justice system. And during that time, he founded. So if you hear what I said during that time. So that means while he was incarcerated, he created this organization called The Bridge, right? And it was a grassroots group of directly impacted justice experts whose mission is to abolish mass incarceration and to find a path to true transformative criminal justice. So you all know transformation is one of my favorite words, right? So everything that I do is based on this idea of transformation, that we can have these transformative experiences and all of that. And they took that and applied it directly to the criminal justice system based on their own personal experiences, right?
You know, Anita, one question will be fun to ask Kevin is the idea that he built this effort while he was still incarcerated, not once he got out and went through all of the changes to try and reintegrate himself. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he connects everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that on-the-job training.
Very much on the job training.
Like that. It's like you got this on-the-job training of how you're going to move beyond where you are in your current situation. But the beauty of it was that it wasn't something that he just developed for himself. It was developed on his experiences, but he took those experiences and created something positive out of it that could impact so many other people. And I think that is the beauty of this work. I have not met either one of them. I basically gathered all of this information by doing research and everything. So Kevin and I have been trying to get together. We had a couple of misses earlier this week and that sort of thing. But hopefully, if everything goes well, he will actually be the guest on our next show in which we can dig into some of these concepts a little bit deeper. One of the other things that that they do under their organization is the free consulting group. So they actually provide consulting and education to a wide variety of justice-related areas, right? So not only do they provide the information for those who are coming out, those who are being reintegrated or re-entering into society, but they also teach people how to consult and how to educate and how to work with those types of individuals as well. So I think that's very cool.
It's an ongoing process, right?
Right. That's right.
You know, yeah, even if you prepare someone once they come out of incarceration, they're going to need support as they encounter unique situations and all that. So that sustainability is really, really key here again.
The process it doesn't have a beginning and ending. It continues.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think another aspect from the consulting and educating in these justice related areas is also educating the public on how do we now engage with people who are formerly incarcerated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's an important piece of it, because when you think about the justice system in general, it can be very unforgiving, right? When people are exiting out of prison, they're re-entering into society. There's a lot of issues and things that can come up that are not necessarily residing within themselves, but residing within the people that are around them. You know, some people think once a criminal, always a criminal. Even if it was the smallest little infraction, once a criminal, always a criminal. You know, so you have those types of things that you have to contend with.
Deal with. Right.
Yeah, there are many distorted beliefs that people have, and without even checking out or finding out what the real truth is about their experience. So yes, they have to face much of that.
It's another monolith, isn't it? Just throwing everyone together who's in prison when their life experience and what they did or did not and them in prison, you know, we don't know. It's varied.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, there's the whole issue with mass incarceration. We understand the history of mass incarceration in this country, where, you know, that amendment that didn't exactly get rid of or abolish slavery, they left that little clause in there, except when it comes to punishment. So it just kind of shifted things into a different space. When you think about prison workers, we were just having that conversation earlier today about the firefighters in California. They're prison firefighters. So it you know, it's just really interesting how we conceptualize the idea of prison labor.
Right.
And it becomes like a part of
free labor, right? It's
exactly.
And many industries see it that way and are happy to use it, happy to use that free labor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me get back to Kevin. So he is the 2018 Association of Writers and Writing Programs Intro Journals Project Award winner. So that's a mouthful. The bottom line is he's a writer. He's a writer. And so I've had the opportunity to read some of his writing. And one of the things that he got the award for was a poetry that is published in the Hayden Ferry Review. I didn't have a chance to kind of dig into that, but he is there. And then he's also featured, and a woman by the name of Emily Baxter has an internationally acclaimed book called We Are All Criminals. So maybe you had talked about, excuse me, you had talked about a little bit earlier. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I would love to.
Yes,
I would
please.
love to. It's a very powerful TED Talk that it's Emily Baxter, right?
Yes.
Gives saying we are all criminals. And she gives some statistics that are sobering to start off with. You know, one in, I think it's either 3 or 4 Black men will spend time up to life in prison. You know what? Before I say something that's not quite right, let me go here. Anyway, and then 1 in 11 white women. So there's this disparate effect on, you know, who's getting picked up by the police for various incidences. Anyway, I see that break won't be in a few minutes. The part about the talk about we are all criminals, all of us have done something that was wrong and we just didn't get caught. And so we're not in the prison system. Something that was not necessarily worthy of being imprisoned, but a lot of people who are in prison are not worthy of being there either. And it was such a leveling thing to hear her talk about how one act in a person's life dictated the rest of their life, that they would always have to check the box felony on, you know, a house loan, a job, everything. All those kinds of systems in our society that keep that person down, even though they've served their time and, have rehabilitated to varying degrees. It was very high impact. I'm going to look into it just a little more during the break, but the idea that we are not so different from the people who are in prison is pretty powerful.
So maybe you don't have to wait, because I just made a decision between Nat and I that we're just going to skip the break because we had a little bit of a late start. And so that's
Okay.
Yeah. So you can finish out your thoughts.
All right. Here we go. I found my notes here. Yeah. So the stats were 65 to 100 million people with criminal records. There are 65 to 100 million people with criminal records in the US. That's a lot of people, 1 in 4. Let's see here. And the statistics that we've been talking about incarceration, if you look at the graph of it, from it's about 1925, it stays sort of level around 200,000, and then it shoots up in 2013 to about 1.6 million, and I'm sure now it's over 2 million. But that was the time of like the 3 strikes you're out kind of thing, and that ties into that amendment in the Constitution that says Black people, so that's not quite the wording, but shall not be incarcerated unless, they have broken the law in some way. So we just changed the laws and are more heavily incarcerating these folks. One of the sentences she says, oh, here it is, Black men, 1 in 3 will spend lifetime in prison. 1 in 3 Black men. White women, 1 in 118. I'm so glad I found my notes. So people on drugs are disproportionately affected. Prison is a warehousing with trauma. So it's not a process to heal people. It's just plain trauma. And some people are in jail for petty theft. And that can include not returning a library book. That could be part of the 3 strikes and you're out. That would be considered theft. Public urination. Oh my gosh, how much I saw in New York. Even law enforcement. I thought this was interesting. Even law enforcers suffer under the weight of the decisions they've made, because they have to know that when they find these crimes that did not cause human, bodily harm to another person, that they are affecting that person's entire life, especially, young kids. We've talked about, Black teenagers, how they're adultified and, accused as being just criminals by the side of them. She gives an example of the human cost of mass incarceration. She even talks about a woman who is caring for her son who's got cancer. And she finds out that pot, marijuana, really relieves his pain symptoms. And the young man dies and her life is just, destroyed. And then some time later, the police have reason to come and search her house and find this pot in the freezer and put her in jail at 72 years old. We got to revisit these things. So when we look at those numbers, it's shocking. When we look at the experience of being incarcerated, how it destroys a life and the community all around that life, and then the trauma of coming out. Like I saw in that one movie, I think it was about desegregation in Boston. A woman came out of prison and said, I don't even have a dime to make a call. I mean, you're just stripped of everything. And this society is built on money. It's built on connections and so on. So she, in the end, she talks about closing the empathy chasm, that we are not defined by our worst moment. And it just made me identify so much more with people and the, lower level crimes. I mean, I've sped in my car, I mean, technically that's against the law. And, that could be one of the 3 strikes and you're out. So those are my impressions of her bit. And the idea that we are all criminals is going to stick with me.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the story about the marijuana, because there's so many states now where marijuana
Yes. Right.
It's not even like a crime.
It's medical, but it's legal.
And so
You can change.
I think it's an interesting connection between the laws in a given time period and what that looks like from a criminal justice perspective. So, 3 strikes, you're out. You get caught with a very low, like one joint or something in your pocket, you could end up going to jail. But then today you walk down the street, you walk in the mall, and people are just smoking
Lighting
weed
up everywhere.
essentially. So it's just so absurd.
Oh,
When you think about it like that. Now, we're obviously not talking about violent crimes or
Right.
mass murder. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about more that low-hanging fruit kind of crimes, and that stuff that really kind of supported that idea of incarcerating Black people, and you created Jim Crow laws, which means now you have a broader spectrum of laws that we have to obey. And if we don't obey them, we could easily end up in the prison population, enslaved again, and working for, the prison, and, building furniture for some furniture company, and all of that, all because you had
For free.
you have something in your pocket. So when you lay it out against like society and how society operates, you can see there are some things that are embedded in there that are just a little bit ridiculous.
And we can change those things because we've changed them the other way. We've made
Yes,
a crime.
exactly.
We can unmake them a crime.
And we're actually going to talk about that as we progress. So I just wanted to finish up what I was some of the things that I was sharing about Kevin Reese's background. I mentioned that he's featured in the We Are All Criminals, Emily Baxter's book that Mavis was just referring to. He also has a running column called Bridging the Gap in the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. So I've looked at a couple of his articles in that realm as well. And I have not met the gentleman yet, but just looking at and collecting the information to do this show, it's pretty impressive what he has done and completely flipped his life around into something completely different. And so I find that to be commendable.
It's fascinating. In one of the videos in the resources you gave us, the interviewer is saying, and you are, and he says, I'm Kevin Reese. And the interviewer says, and tell me something else about you. And in that moment, I thought about all the discussions we've had about identity and how I'm sure he had to work on his identity. And then finally he said, oh, I'm a writer, I'm a father, I'm a collaborator, I'm an organizer. And I just thought that was beautiful, but it wasn't the first thing that came to his mind. How we're used to doing our elevator speeches, but yeah, he had to just totally rebuild his identity coming out.
Well, I think so many people don't realize that the prisoners are fathers and their brothers and their right. They have children or grandchildren, and that their desire is really to be able to live in their community and be a leader for those that they love and care for. It is not really to spend their life in prison, as many have done, right? Either unjustly or that because of the changes that have happened over the years, such as with the marijuana and so forth.
Exactly.
These are human beings that they have rights and wants and feelings and needs and desires.
As we all do.
We all do. That's right.
So it's a very interesting topic that we're having here. And then I want to shift over to Kaylee Griffey. She is a co-founder and co-executive director, as well as a consultant with Until We Are Free, their consulting group. So again, it's interesting that the two of these people, the thing that they have in common is that they were both incarcerated, and they came together and created this work out of this, that conception, if you will, sparked this whole other parallel life that they are now living. And I just think that's so amazing. One of the things that is a little bit different about her is that she looks at it more through the lens of girls, women in prison, her being a woman herself. So it says here that she is the mother of two girls, and she became an advocate for those who are experiencing incarceration after overcoming her own experiences with juvenile incarceration. So it goes on to say that this traumatic experience is what motivated her to get her degree in criminal justice. And she started fighting for those who were still suffering from this harmful system. She has worked in a variety of nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations, state government positions, and most recently in the Minnesota Department of Corrections Central Office in the Victims Assistance and Restorative Justice Unit, right? And so it goes on to say that her background is primarily in the area of community reentry. So it's interesting, although we haven't really talked about it in depth, some of the work that Kevin did, it's work that was working with the prisoners while they were still in prisons, like the writing project and different things like that he was going through. But for her, it's much more related, not exclusively for either one of them, but just these general trends, I would say, in terms of what their path actually look like. And so her background is primarily in the area of community reentry and restorative justice and the gender-specific needs of justice involving women and girls, right? And so I read a little bit also on her George Floyd origin story, because she had written an article where she was talking about her George Floyd origin story. And one of the things that she says, this particular quote, allyship is so much more than just supporting Black people. It means taking the time to evaluate and understand how our own actions can contribute to harm and racism, and making a conscious daily effort to be aware of the potential impact each decision that we make will have on people of color. That is such a powerful, powerful statement. And when you take that type of mindset, if you will, and apply it to the work that she does in restorative justice and criminal reform and all of that, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she also went on. Yeah, she went on to also talk about that this is what she meant by "until we are all free" and what it means to her. And I think it's just as important to share it. She says, "I may be physically free, but emotionally and mentally, I won't ever be 100% free until I don't have to worry about the safety and freedom of the people I love and care for. Their fight is my fight. I want to fight for justice and equity." Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
she knows, and she's experienced it. And so I think what she's doing for girls and women is very profound and so needed.
I just want to interject a little anecdote. I watched a film on Netflix. It's called Daughters. Have either of you seen it? It happens to be about a group of young little Black girls in school, and the teacher asked them what they would like to do, and they said, "We'd like to have a dance with our daddies." And one little girl said, "My daddy can't come because he's in jail." So the whole film is about the teacher saying, "Well, let's move the dance to the prison." And so the first part of the film, you get to hear what the little girls are thinking about their dads. It's a lot of what we've talked about. They don't know their dads' faces. They're angry with them, or they miss them. It's very emotional. And then the other part of it is this fellow that runs the program works with the fathers to say, this is how this might go for you. So this is really important that you kind of prepare yourself emotionally to see your child. Your little girl needs you. At the start of the film, it says something like, our daddies are the mirrors that we look into to see the kind of man we will look for in our lives. and the kind of man we deserve. And so in a lot of ways, our society isn't giving, especially low-level offenders, a chance to be those fathers. You know, we talk about Black families without a man in the house and so on. This is all interconnected, right? Anyway, it's such a sweet, touching little film, and it really humanizes the experiences of these men and the impact on their families, which, you know, most of us are not thinking about that in a holistic way, in a 360 way, right? And they probably weren't either when they bought a dime bag of pot, you know, or whatever happened to them. And it's like, I think it was Emily Baxter that said that any imprisonment is a life sentence. It affects you your entire life.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Because they always have to check that box, right?
Watch that film, Daughters. It's precious.
Yeah,
it's really precious.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have to go back, and I hadn't heard about that one. So now, just in the interest of time, to make sure that we can cover a little bit more about the organization itself, I'd like to shift the conversation and talk about what it is they do. So they have it broken down in these two categories: what we do as in our focus areas, and then how we move in terms of our core values. So I'm going to go through some of those details. So in terms of their focus areas, there's advocacy, where the organization serves as a representative of justice-impacted leaders from across the state, amplifying voices and championing meaningful policy changes through strategic advocacy initiatives. So there's the advocacy piece. Then there's also the housing piece, and that is recognizing the importance. This is so important across the board. Recognizing the importance of stable housing, dedicated to acquiring residential properties that offer safe and affordable housing options with a pathway, get this, with a pathway to home ownership. So it's built right in to this is what we focus on, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the consulting and training piece, which I had mentioned a little bit more, consulting and educating in a wide variety of justice-related areas. And then there's the safe space. It's operating a drop-in working space for justice-impacted individuals and collectives in Minneapolis, right? And so this drop-in working space, I have that downtown, right? My working space.
That's right.
And so that's just such a beautiful idea to have that set up also for those individuals who may have dealt with incarceration and they're working to, you know, get their business lives together and what have you, that they have that kind of space that they would be able to work in. And then now we'll switch to how we move. These are our core values. So first, there's safety and wellness. In order to work with people effectively, they have to feel safe. And if an individual feels unsafe, then they are unwell and unable to fully receive what is being offered. That's a powerful statement right there. So they take safety, safety and wellness very seriously, believing we cannot do this work without prioritizing these values, right? Then there's equity and resources. Knowing that billions of dollars have been invested and spent on criminal justice. Just thinking about that, all the money that gets invested and spent on criminal justice and all of that with little impact in our communities. So there's a firm belief that those who are closest to the pain are closest to the solution, right?
I love that.
Yes. And then there's a collective over competition. Collective over competition, modeling in their actions the world we want to exist in, right? What do we want that world to look like? And if that's what we want the world to look like, we have to be willing to model that, right? And this last one, I love this statement. People are not disposable, right? We don't believe in the act of showing investment in individuals and writing them off later. We believe that this further harms the community, replicates the expectations of the system, that individuals' trauma come out in a manageable way or that that person's value is determined by the skill. We choose to teach, coach, and offer alternative solutions that foster empowerment, right? That's amazing. That's amazing. So our time is winding down. So I wanted to make sure that we could go through just this last piece. And this last piece is around sort of outside of this organization and really looking at something called the First Person Act. And now this is kind of getting into prison reform on a much bigger level, on a legislative level. And so the First Person Act is a groundbreaking piece of legislation that has significantly impacted the justice system. It was passed in the United States, has been a beacon of hope for many who have long advocated for criminal justice reform. So you have the people kind of here at the grassroots level, but then there's a lot of activity that's going on at the prison reform at the legislative level as well. Some of those key provisions are moving from sentencing to rehabilitation, right? Those sentencing reform, reducing some of those mandatory minimums, like maybe you mentioned that 3 strikes you're out kind of thing. Rehabilitation and reentry programs, I think that's probably one of the really, really big ones. And that is helping to get people prepared for life after prison, number one, but also reducing recidivism rates. So people aren't, kind of, they talk about that revolving door, people going in, coming out, going back in, that you're doing things that are going to halt that because you're focusing now on rehabilitation and you're focusing on reform. So that makes a huge, huge difference, right?
We got to watch this group going forward, see what their stats are, because it's a young organization, right?
Yeah, they're focusing on training. They're focusing on being able to help these people be able to figure out who they are and what they really are interested in, what they want and are able to do. It's treating them like human beings that they probably never had that experience, that anybody focused on them.
Right. And getting over the hurdles that they will.
Right. It's allowing a transformation to occur.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not just a reform.
In one of the readings I had done, I don't remember whether it was Kevin or the woman that was speaking. I don't remember which one it was, but it was making the point that individuals, and they are 2 examples of what they're talking about. 2, individuals who they have dreams inside of them. And they have these desires inside of them. Nobody desires to go to prison.
That's right.
Nobody desires to be incarcerated. But some of the activities that were described in terms of what they do while in working with individuals while they're still in prison, and some of the activities that they do, the writing projects and all of that, you get to discover what were their dreams? What were the things that they really wanted to do with their life, right? And once that comes out, once that becomes visible, then it kind of takes them to a completely different level. And then when they do come out, and this whole idea of how they're being received in society, are we receiving them as individuals who have dreams and desires for their life? Nobody desires to go to prison. No. I need to correct something I said earlier. I attributed a quote to Emily Baxter. It was actually Brian Kelly, the CEO of a nonprofit that helps inmates start businesses. He's the one who said, because of all of the obstacles and the prejudice, because of society's stance, every sentence is a life sentence. So he was the one, and he's right on. Yes, and I love that play on words. It's something that impacts your entire life, right? So just to kind of get back to this First Person Act. So then there's a couple of key points on its impact on the justice system, real world effects of the act on the justice system. By examining these impacts, we can gain a deeper understanding of its significance and its potential for future reform. Profound impact on the justice system. Its provisions have led to significant changes in sentencing, incarceration rates, and the focus on rehabilitation. And to me, that's the big deal, because you can be rehabilitated while you're serving out your sentence and come out and be a completely different person than who you were when you went in. And when I look at these two individuals, I would say they are perfect examples of that, right? I don't know a lot of details on what it was that got them incarcerated, but that's not even the point. The point is who they became as a result of being incarcerated and who they transformed into and now can have that same impact on other people's lives. That's what's important.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we've heard many stories of people who transform themselves as individuals while they're incarcerated. You know, there's still that will and that desire in many people to be more than that single act.
Well, it's the human spirit, I think, that desires that. Always. We're always trying to strive onward and upward, kind of, and nobody wants to choose that path. That's not what they're conscious. They're reacting to whatever happened to them in their life, and I hope to see that at some point they're doing more for that, because it's a lot of these people that have been incarcerated or are incarcerated have had very traumatic experiences growing up. And you have to kind of address that, just as we all do if you've experienced any kind of trauma, whether you've ended up in prison or not, you know, in order to truly heal and to make that, allow that transformation to take place. You know,
right. Good point.
All of this is important. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to read a little bit here, a little bit more about the act, the first person act that we're describing, and give us some societal context. So it says here, I'm just trying to look at the time. It says here that the law was born out of a growing recognition in the United States for criminal justice reform. We can all agree that we needed criminal justice reform. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Just let that sink in the world, with over 2 million people behind bars. This high rate of incarceration, coupled with systemic issues, this is what we were talking about earlier, coupled with systemic issues such as racial disparities in sentencing, led to a widespread call for change. The public outcry was loud and clear, and the First Person Act was a response to these calls. The act was designed to address some of the most pressing issues. It was designed to reduce the prison population, promote rehabilitation over punishment, and create a more equitable justice system. Mm-hmm. You can't have these conversations without talking about equity, right? Without talking about racial disparities.
Absolutely.
It's all a part of the conversation. And it's about looking for or creating a system that is fair and just for everybody. For everybody, right? So I think we're almost out of time. We have about 5 more minutes left. And so I just wanted to kind of close out this session. So here's a quote from the First Step Act, which is connected to everything that we've been talking about with the First Person Act. In the long run, the act could lead to further reforms in the justice system. This is beyond where they even are right now. Setting a precedent for future legislation. Its success could also inspire other countries to adopt similar reforms, potentially leading to a global shift in the approach to criminal justice. That's really powerful, a global shift in the approach to criminal justice. The First Person Act could be just the beginning of a broader movement towards a more equitable and effective approach to criminal justice. Mm-hmm. So that's a very, very powerful statement right there.
It's a heavy lift.
It's a heavy lift.
Seriously heavy lift.
Yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like everything that we're involved in right now in this moment in time is a heavy lift.
It is.
Yes, for
Everything.
sure. For sure.
And so it's like, get your muscle, your emotional muscles, all of that. Because we have to be
step into it.
Always prepared to step into it, always prepared for resistance.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
Right. Change doesn't happen without resistance to it. Always.
Absolutely.
Step into the resistance. Yeah.
So we, if you've been watching the show, listening to us, you know that we always were like everything back to the Cairo question. That was something that grew out of my George Floyd origin story. And the reason why I do the work that I do, because I really want this country, our country, to be better. For all of those little 4-year-olds, my grandson is now 4. He'll be 5 in about 2 weeks. But I want things to be so much better for them. So in their future, they don't have to fight for that birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which they are born, no matter what that skin looks like, right? So the question is it possible? Those of you who are listening, do you believe it is possible to imagine a future free from the shackles of divisive conversations? Because we hear those conversations like this in our ear all the time. I believe the answer is a resounding yes, it is possible. Yeah. And we all have a specific role to play. And we, each of us, get to identify what do we want that role to be. But whatever you choose your role to be, the key is transformative engagement. And that transformative engagement begins with what is in yourself. What lies within you, your thoughts, beliefs, ideas. And how does all of that show up in your words, your actions, your behaviors, right? So the question is, what will you do to contribute?
Yeah.
That's a question that I ask all the time. What will you do to contribute? So
there's something you can do. There's something you
absolutely.
can do.
That's right.
Absolutely. But one of the things that you can do, if you're listening, I'd like to invite you to join the conversation with Mavis, Gail, and I on our private Facebook page under the podcast name InflexionPoint Podcast. So if you just go on and join the InflexionPoint Podcast private Facebook group, and I would love to hear your feedback. What do you think about some of these things that we're talking about, especially as we're moving forward? So that's pretty much it for this episode. For those of you who are listening, I thank you so much for listening. For those of you who are repeat listeners, I thank you even more for being a repeat listener. And we are here every first and third Wednesday of the month on Transformation Talk Radio. And this is Anita, Mavis, and Gail signing off from Inflection Point Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.